Let's bring in our panel tonight for reaction. Former Navy SEAL Dave Sears. Former Green Beret Commander Michael Waltz, now running for a congressional seat from Florida. Republican Congressman from Illinois Adam Kinzinger, who sits on the House Foreign Relations Committee and is a pilot, also currently serving as a major in the Air National Guard. And Fox News contributor, former Utah Congressman Jason Chaffetz, welcome, and thank you all for your time tonight. Congressman Kinzinger, I'll start with you. We're told that U.S. Navy warships were used, also B-1 bombers. Given your experience in the military, tell us about the capabilities of those two working together.
Well, they're impressive capabilities. The B-1 bomber was actually initially created as a nuclear delivery system that does great conventional weapon capabilities. Now they're used in Afghanistan, Iraq, both for close air support and long-range standoff strikes like this. The Navy assets, of course, are really good at what they do. This sent an impressive message tonight, not just that the U.S. is going to stand by its word, that the president means what he says, which, by the way, is going to alleviate a lot of conflict in the future. When he says something, people aren't going to try to test him. But it also sent a strong message to Russia and to Iran that we are serious about standing up for good order in this world and standing with our allies, even if you bluster and Russia blustered. And I think at the end of the day, they're going to do nothing about it.
All right, Jason, let me bring you in here because I had a lengthy conversation with a senior GOP lawmaker, very much a hawk on the Hill, saying that they were actually worried. They didn't think the president's speech tonight was strong enough. They don't think these strikes are broad enough and impressive enough to actually send a long-term message. What do you make of what we've telegraphed to Russia, to Iran, and to Syrians' leaders?
Well, hopefully what I think it was is that the president actually...
I'm sorry, Jason.
Depleted. Yeah. Sorry, Shannon. Hopefully what they did is actually did deplete the ability to deliver the chemical weapons. It does beg the question, if we knew that there were chemical weapons in those places, why didn't we go preemptively take that out? And nevertheless, I think a broad coalition bringing in France and the UK does send the right message. It begs the question, where are other partners? You know, where are places like Germany? If this is such a world atrocity, why weren't they with us? But I think President Trump did do the right thing. He was very limited, very tempered, very calculated. And I think that in the long term, President Trump will be applauded for such a strategic strike such as he did.
All right, Michael, to you, that point about Germany, you know, Chancellor Angela Merkel has said this week that they weren't going to get militarily involved if there was a military strike. The UK and France on board with us. But additional questions, and the president in his remarks tonight talked as well about partners in the region, people that he expects to step up and take responsibility for securing their own stability there. He specifically mentioned Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Egypt, and others in the region. What do you make of that?
Well, so there were a number of very interesting aspects of the president's speech. You mentioned Germany. You know, there were a number of references to World War I, where it's the last time chemical weapons were actively used in combat, and it was actually the French and the British that suffered mightily at German hands for the use of chemical weapons. So, I mean, I just thought that was an interesting historic reference. But then he also mentioned the Gulf states and their role in the coalition and you know, what he's expecting now in terms of their participation in the nation-building aspect and the reconstruction aspect after you know, we completely destroy ISIS and we drive the rest of the Syrian conflict to hopefully at some point some type of brokered negotiation. You know, that was under the guise and in the context of the president wanting to get U.S. soldiers out, to not be bogged down and to spend a lot of money and more blood and treasure in the reconstruction aspect, and that he's clearly looking at the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Jordanians, and the other Gulf states to step in there.
So, Dave, now, as somebody who has served our country on the front lines, what does it mean to our men and women in uniform? Because there's been a lot of talk on the Hill and elsewhere this week and tonight about having a long-term strategy. And when we ask men and women to go into service into these situations, that we need to understand, we already have boots on the ground there, what the long-term plan is for them. Do you think this administration has articulated that well enough? Do they owe more to the men and women we have serving there and those we may ask to join these efforts?
Certainly they owe more on the long-term plan. They haven't articulated that, whether it's Syria, whether it's Afghanistan, whether it's still our presence in Iraq, and the way they look at that. What we're very good at is tactical strikes and executing things like this. We're excellent at that. What we're not good at is articulating what's the end game of this? Where do we go with it? I agree with this strike and kind of where it sits, very narrowly defined against chemical weapons. We go beyond that, and now we're getting into, hey, start telling the American people and the soldiers fighting, what are you fighting for?
Yeah, and like I said, we've been getting a number of reactions from Capitol Hill. And it's interesting because there are Republicans and Democrats on both sides of this. Congressman Kinzinger, to you, one of your Republican colleagues, Congressman Justin Amash, says this: these offensive strikes against Syria are unconstitutional, illegal, and reckless. The next Speaker of the House must reclaim congressional war powers as prescribed in Article 1 of the Constitution. Speaker Ryan has completely abdicated one of his most important responsibilities. Where do you come down in this debate?
Well, look, Justin Amash has never supported, he frankly votes against the defense budget every time it comes up, votes against the Natural Defense Authorization Act. He's not a pro-military, pro-foreign policy guy whatsoever. I come down, I believe that the president has a lot of powers enumerated in the Constitution. Our job in Congress is to declare a state of war exists and to finance it or to use money to make differences that way. But the president is commander-in-chief, and you have a lot of members of Congress and the Senate that want to feel extremely important, so they basically say that there should be 535 commanders-in-chief. Anytime the president does anything, that we have to have a say on something like this, standing for national interests, standing against the use of chemical weapons. The president acted reasonably outside of having to get congressional approval. We're not putting 200,000 troops in Syria. If we were doing that, he would need to come to Congress.
Jason, what do you make of the role of Israel? Because, in this whole thing, that's their neighborhood. They're there. We know that we've been hearing that Russian President Vladimir Putin has been reaching out directly to Netanyahu this week, that they've had an interesting relationship with Russia, but they're absolutely not going to stand for anything that would allow Iran to encroach any closer on their territory. What's their role tonight?
Well, remarkably, part of what Iran and Russia have done is united the Saudi Arabia and Israel. It's unbelievable how close they are in terms of their positioning on this. And if you look at the proximity of Israel, I guarantee you that our military and our political leaders are hand in glove working and understanding that. And if you look at Jordan, they're just to the east of Israel. They are dealing with literally hundreds of thousands of refugees that have crossed and fled over the border as this civil war has gone on for such a long time here. They too have a vested interest. They are great partners with the United States of America. And again, I think the president did a very strategic, limited type of hit tonight. I think it was called for. I think it was right. But I do think it would be stronger long term if the president needs to have continuous action to get the support of Congress and put people on the record, make them vote on it. Again, if there's a clear and present danger, the president should go get them and go with everything he needs to do. If it's going to be sustained over a long period of time, show the world that the United States Congress is behind this president.
Yeah, and Michael, tonight what we're hearing from the chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee, John McCain, who's now recovering at home, but speaking out very clearly on this tonight. He's praising what had happened tonight, but he says to succeed in the long run, we need a comprehensive strategy for Syria and the entire region. It's time for the president to lay out our goals, not just with regard to ISIS, because he's been clear on that, but also the ongoing conflict in Syria and malign Russian and Iranian influence in the region. He says airstrikes disconnected from a broader strategy may be necessary, but they alone will not achieve U.S. objectives in the Middle East. What does the president need to say to the American people or to Congress to those points?
Well, there's a few things there. There was, if you look at how the targets were struck, it's interesting that we went after the chemical weapon sites and the production facilities, but not the Syrian Air Force. And there was a lot of reporting this week of, one, the Syrians moving their Air Force assets to intermingle with the Russians, and to raise the bar there in terms of potential escalation. And then, two, we were hearing that the president wanted to make a much broader strike and a much stronger statement to stop the Syrian capability once and for all, but yet General Mattis pushing back because he was very concerned about Russian reaction and escalation. So, to your point of where are we going with this more broadly, well, I think the administration has been clear that we need to, number one, defeat ISIS once and for all, but then also set the conditions to prevent the return of ISIS. The last thing we want to do is completely pull out and see ISIS 3.0 come back. So I think we're seeing the administration now look to the Gulf Arab allies and others to take on that reconstruction role. But then the second part, to Jason's point and to Congressman Kinzinger's point is, what are we going to do more broadly about the Syrian civil war? We're trying to drive that to a UN-brokered resolution. I think one could look over the horizon and see some type of potential power-sharing arrangement, somewhat like what happened after Lebanon in the civil war. But the key there is Assad must go. We cannot see I cannot foresee some broad power-sharing agreement with Assad still in place, given what he has done so brutally over the last 5 years. And I think everyone's exactly right. We need to set that broader strategy. What are our goals, and drive towards it.
All right, Dave, I want to give you a chance to wrap up this panel before we check in Jerusalem.
Yeah, I think that he's absolutely right when he talks about we need to have a broader strategy for the region. We don't know what that is. We don't know what our objectives are. And I also don't think that just not hitting the Russian pieces was intended, or the Air Force of Syria was intended just for Russia. You don't want to weaken Assad so that the rebels are able to become emboldened, and now you extend the civil war. So how much damage do you do doing that? So I think it was a cautious, good strike. We'll see what happens in the future.
We'll see what comes next. And we always know that when a leader is taken out in this, there's a vacuum situation, and that is, bears much caution. All right, stick around. Thank you very much.